3 hours before my sister's wedding, my mother handed me a catering uniform and told me to change in the staff restroom. I thought she was joking. I had flown across the country with a garment bag, a wrapped gift, and the dress Olivia had approved 6 weeks earlier. I had spent months rearranging meetings, transferring deposits, and fixing problems no one else wanted to touch. I had even covered the final tasting when my father claimed his card had been frozen. Yet Patricia Donovan stood beside the service entrance, holding out a polyester shirt with a venue logo stitched over the heart. "You're not attending as a guest," she said. "You're helping." Behind her, kitchen staff pushed carts through swinging doors. Beyond the wall, a string quartet rehearsed Olivia's entrance song. I could hear laughter from the bridal suite and bridesmaids calling for more champagne. My name was Paige Donovan. I was 34, Olivia's only sister, and apparently the one person at her wedding expected to enter through the loading dock. I stared at the uniform, waiting for my mother's expression to crack. It did not. She explained the humiliation like a scheduling adjustment. One server had called in sick. The catering manager needed someone reliable. I was good under pressure. Olivia already had enough attention on her. A disagreement in front of Ryan's relatives would look embarrassing. That was how my mother operated. She never said she wanted to erase me. She described my disappearance as the practical solution. I asked where my seat was. Patricia looked toward the ballroom instead of answering. There was no seat. 4 months. I had been included just enough to be useful. I reviewed vendor estimates because my father said I understood numbers. I paid deposits because Olivia's account had limits. I saw the contract dispute when the florist threatened to cancel. Every emergency became mine. Every celebration remained hers. Still, I believed I would enter that room as family. Then the service door opened, and Olivia appeared in a silk robe embroidered with bride. Her hair was pinned beneath a crystal comb I had bought after she sent me the link with 3 heart emojis. She looked from my dress bag to the uniform and did not seem surprised. Olivia knew. She had known long enough to let me travel, book a hotel, wrap her gift, and arrive believing I mattered. "We need everyone to cooperate today," she said, glancing toward 2 bridesmaids watching from the hallway. "Please don't turn this into one of your emotional moments." The last time Olivia used that phrase was when I refused to finance an apartment she could not afford. Patricia repeated it until my boundary became a defect and Olivia's entitlement became an emergency. Now my sister stood there in a robe I had paid to alter, asking me not to embarrass her by reacting to my humiliation. A bridesmaid whispered something. The others laughed. Patricia pushed the uniform into my hands. "We told Ryan's family you preferred staying behind the scenes," she said. "Don't make us look dishonest." That sentence exposed the trap. They had not made a last-minute decision. They had built a story around my absence. 200 guests believed I had chosen not to sit with my family. Ryan's parents believed I was too private, busy, or distant to participate. Olivia had protected her perfect wedding by turning me into a shadow and assigning the shadow a tray. I should have left. Instead, I carried the uniform into the staff restroom. Not because they deserved my help, but because 20 years of being called dependable had trained me to confuse endurance with love. I hung my dress behind the door. The champagne fabric brushed stained tile while I buttoned the black shirt. The sleeves were too long. The shoes pinched. My name tag read Paige, as though the venue had been expecting me. When I returned, Patricia looked relieved. Olivia looked satisfied. Neither thanked me. 10 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. Guests rose as my sister entered beneath white flowers, every arrangement secured under a contract I had negotiated. I stood by the kitchen doors holding champagne while my father walked Olivia down the aisle. As they passed, he saw me. His eyes dropped to the uniform. Then he looked away. That was when I stopped believing this was only about a wedding. Before the night ended, they would make sure every guest understood exactly where they believed I belonged. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes. I spent every one of them standing beside the kitchen doors with a silver tray balanced against my forearm, watching strangers celebrate a family that had quietly removed me from it. Nobody introduced me. Nobody questioned why the bride's sister was carrying champagne instead of flowers. Because nobody believed I was the bride's sister. That realization hurt more than the uniform. My parents hadn't humiliated me in the moment. They had prepared the humiliation months in advance. Every conversation with Ryan's family, every seating chart, every rehearsal, every introduction. My absence had already been explained long before I stepped onto the property. The applause erupted as Olivia and Ryan kissed. Seconds later, the ballroom transformed into organized chaos. Guests stood, hugged one another, and followed the newlyweds toward the reception while the catering staff spread through the room like invisible machinery. I became part of that machinery. A supervisor I had never met pointed toward a tray. Table 7. I obeyed before remembering I didn't work there. The first guest smiled politely as I filled his glass. Beautiful wedding. I nodded. It really is. Another woman asked whether the bride had always dreamed of getting married there. I answered with the truth. Since she was little. She smiled. You must know the family well. I almost laughed. I do. She thanked me and turned away without asking another question. That happened over and over. Every conversation reminded me that I had become anonymous inside my own family celebration. Half an hour into the reception, another humiliation arrived. The photographer gathered everyone for family portraits. Parents, grandparents, cousins, the bridal party, children, Ryan's relatives. I watched from behind a dessert station. Not because nobody had called my name, because nobody even looked for me. The photographer paused once and asked whether everyone was ready. Patricia answered before anyone else could speak. We're complete. The shutter clicked. Then again, and again. Every photograph captured the story my mother wanted preserved forever. A perfect family. Without me. I forced myself to keep serving drinks. If I stopped moving, I knew I would break. The speeches began. Ryan thanked both families for welcoming him. He spoke warmly about loyalty, about unconditional support, about gaining parents and a sister. A sister. The word caught my attention immediately. He wasn't talking about me. He was thanking one of Olivia's bridesmaids who had been like the sister she never had. Several guests laughed. Olivia smiled through fake tears. My mother reached for Ryan's hand proudly. Nobody noticed the actual sister collecting empty champagne flutes 20 feet away. The room applauded again. I concentrated on stacking glasses so tightly that my knuckles turned white. That should have been the lowest point. It wasn't. Dinner service started. The head server hurried toward me looking anxious. Change of plans. Before I could ask why, Patricia appeared beside him. There aren't enough servers for the head table. She looked directly at me. You'll handle it. Not one table among 200 guests. The head table. My parents. My sister. Ryan. His parents. Every important person at the wedding. Patricia wasn't solving a staffing problem. She wanted every important guest to see exactly where she believed I belonged. Serving them, not sitting beside them. As I approached with the first course, Ryan finally recognized me. Confusion crossed his face. He opened his mouth as if trying to remember where we had met. Olivia answered before he could ask. She stepped in to help us today. He accepted the explanation immediately. Why wouldn't he? No husband expects his new wife to lie about having a sister. I placed each plate carefully. When I reached my father's seat, he refused to look up. When I reached Patricia, she quietly adjusted the fork so I would lean closer. Then, without moving her smile, she whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. Keep your head down. I understood why a second later. Margaret Mitchell, Ryan's mother, had turned toward our table. She was watching me with polite curiosity. Patricia smiled back at her with the effortless confidence of someone who believed every lie was still under control. Then she said something that made the room around me disappear. We've always been a family of 3. For a heartbeat, nobody reacted. Margaret simply nodded. Ryan smiled. Olivia lifted her wineglass. Only I understood what those 7 words actually meant. I wasn't being hidden anymore. I had been erased, and before dessert was served, someone at that table was going to ask the one question my mother had spent months trying to avoid. Margaret Mitchell set her wineglass down without taking her eyes off me. There was no suspicion in her expression yet, only curiosity. She watched me place the final dinner plate in front of Ryan before smiling politely. "You've been helping all day," she said. "You must be very close to the family." Every movement around the table slowed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for my mother to notice. Patricia answered before I had time to breathe. She's always been happiest supporting everyone else. Another lie. Smooth. Practiced. Delivered with the same effortless warmth she'd used my entire childhood whenever she needed strangers to believe we were the perfect family. Margaret nodded. "That's rare nowadays." Patricia smiled proudly. "We've always taught loyalty." The irony almost made me choke. Loyalty. That word had built my entire relationship with them. Loyalty was paying Olivia's college rent without asking questions. Loyalty was wiring money whenever my parents called with another emergency. Loyalty was spending weekends negotiating contracts for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. Loyalty was standing in a catering uniform while complete strangers occupied the seat that should have been mine. No, this wasn't loyalty. It was exploitation dressed as family values. I picked up the empty appetizer plates. As I reached Ryan, he lowered his voice. "I don't think we've officially met." Before I could answer, Olivia laughed. Paige has always preferred staying behind the scenes. Ryan accepted it with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. It's been a crazy day." He still didn't know. He had married into a lie less than 3 hours earlier. I walked away carrying the dishes, but I felt his eyes follow me. For the first time that day, someone seemed confused. That tiny crack mattered, because lies never collapse all at once. They begin with confusion. Back inside the kitchen, the catering manager thanked me for helping. He assumed I had been hired through an agency. Another person who had never imagined I belonged at the head table instead of behind it. I removed my gloves and leaned against a stainless steel counter. My phone vibrated. An automatic email. Final vendor confirmation. I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened it, then another, and another. Within 60 seconds, every missing piece finally connected. The ballroom, the catering company, the florist, the live band, the luxury furniture rental. Every invoice listed exactly one responsible party. Contract holder, Paige Donovan. My signature appeared beneath every agreement. Not Patricia's, not Edward's, not Olivia's. Mine. Each contract carried the same clause. Remaining balance will be charged within 5 business days after the event unless otherwise instructed by the contract holder. Contract holder, not guarantor, not emergency contact. Holder. My pulse slowed, not from panic, from clarity. Months earlier, Patricia had insisted the vendors needed someone with stronger credit just to secure the reservations. She never intended to transfer responsibility later. She had built the entire wedding on my financial reputation, then erased me from the celebration before the invoices arrived. The total appeared at the bottom of the folder. $41,862. The deposits were already gone. Almost $4,000. Non-refundable. The remaining balance would arrive on my card within days. I looked through the kitchen window. The reception was becoming louder. Guests danced beneath thousands of dollars in flowers. Waiters carried premium wine. The band Olivia insisted was absolutely essential had started playing. Every minute of that celebration increased a bill they expected me to absorb without complaint. Suddenly, the catering uniform made perfect sense. It wasn't punishment. It was insurance. If I stayed busy, I wouldn't ask questions. If I stayed humiliated, I wouldn't notice the paperwork. If I left quietly, the invoices would arrive after everyone returned from their honeymoon. My family hadn't simply excluded me. They had engineered the entire weekend. Every humiliation had served a purpose. I folded the emails, closed one by one. No anger, no tears, no dramatic scene. Only a decision. 4 years. Every crisis in my family ended exactly the same way. Someone else created the problem. I solved it. This time, the problem belonged to the people dancing under the lights. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to rescue them. Outside, the DJ announced it was time for the father-daughter dance. My father walked onto the dance floor, smiling proudly beside Olivia. The guests applauded. I watched from the kitchen doorway, wearing the same black uniform my mother had chosen for me. Then I quietly reached into my pocket, opened the first contract, and began reading every line they hoped I never would. I didn't leave immediately. That was exactly what my family expected me to do. Disappear quietly, cry alone, then accept the bill a few days later because that's what family does. Instead, I finished my shift. I carried trays, collected empty glasses, cleared tables. Every plate I removed reminded me that every bite being eaten would soon become my financial responsibility if I stayed silent. Only now, I understood the game. Near the end of the reception, the catering manager stopped me beside the kitchen. "You've been incredible today." He smiled warmly. "If you ever want weekend work, call me." I almost laughed. For 12 hours, he had treated me with more respect than my own parents. I thanked him and changed back into my dress after the last guests began leaving. The navy fabric still looked perfect. Nobody had seen me wearing it. I folded the catering uniform carefully instead of throwing it away. For reasons I couldn't explain yet, I knew I would need it again. Outside, luxury cars lined up to take guests back to their hotels. Music drifted through the night air while people hugged the newlyweds goodbye. I walked toward my rental car, carrying the wrapped wedding gift I'd never had the chance to give Olivia. Halfway across the parking lot, someone called my name. It was Ryan. He had loosened his tie and looked exhausted, but there was genuine confusion on his face. "Paige!" I stopped. "I've been trying to catch you. For the first time all day. We were alone." "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Olivia told me you volunteered to help because the catering company was short-staffed." There it was. Another lie, bigger than the last one. I looked back toward the reception hall where my parents were laughing with guests. Then back at Ryan. "I hope you enjoyed your wedding." "I did." He hesitated. "But something feels strange." He glanced toward the ballroom. My parents kept asking why Olivia's sister wasn't there. Silence. I told them maybe she couldn't make it. Another silence. Then he frowned. "But you're Paige Donovan." He had finally connected the names. "If you're Olivia's sister..." He stopped talking. His expression changed completely. He wasn't stupid. He was doing the math. I could have ended everything right there. One sentence. One truth. The reception would have exploded before midnight. Instead, I simply smiled. "Congratulations, Ryan." Then I walked away. Behind me, I heard him call my name again. I didn't turn around. Some truths become far more powerful when someone discovers them on their own. The drive back to the hotel was silent. No music, no phone calls, just 40 minutes of replaying every moment of the day. The uniform, the photographs, were complete. We've always been a family of 3. Every sentence now had a purpose. None of it had been impulsive. It had been rehearsed. Inside my hotel room, I spread every contract across the bed. 7 vendors, 7 signatures, 7 opportunities for my family to destroy my financial future. Each agreement contained the same clause. Only the contract holder could authorize the final payment. Only the contract holder, not the bride, not the parents, me. I opened my laptop. One by one, I searched every vendor's customer service email. Then I drafted 4 nearly identical messages. Professional, short, emotionless, no accusations, no family drama, only facts. I requested that no remaining balance be processed until I personally approved every outstanding charge. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't send them. Not yet. First, I wanted to know exactly how desperate my family would become. Sunday morning, I boarded my flight home before sunrise. Nobody from my family called. Nobody asked where I was. Nobody thanked me for traveling. Nobody asked whether I had landed safely. By the time my plane touched down, Olivia had already posted dozens of wedding photos. I wasn't in a single one. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Even the background shots had been cropped so thoroughly that there wasn't a trace of me anywhere. Then I noticed something else. The caption, "The happiest day of my life," surrounded by everyone who truly mattered. Thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments. My parents proudly responding beneath nearly every one. I closed the app. 5 minutes later, the first automated invoice appeared in my inbox. Then another. Then another. 4 vendors. Nearly $42,000. Payment scheduled within 5 business days. Exactly as the contracts promised. I looked at the total. Then at the wedding photo. Everyone who truly mattered. For years, I had spent my money trying to earn a place inside that sentence. Now I finally understood. There had never been a place waiting for me. Only a bill. I opened the first email I had drafted the night before. Read it one last time. Then pressed send. I expected the first call before noon. It came at 9:17. My mother's name lit up my screen. I let it ring until the last second before answering. Patricia sounded nothing like the composed woman who had orchestrated the wedding. There was urgency beneath every word. Paige, the venue says you've suspended the payment authorization. Not how are you? Not did you get home safely? Straight to the money. I asked them to wait for my approval. A long silence. You need to call them back. I don't. Another silence. They're saying the invoices have nowhere to go. They do. They belong to the people who hosted the wedding. Her breathing became heavier. You signed those contracts. I did. So legally they're yours. I also hold the authority to approve every remaining charge. She hadn't expected me to know that. For the first time, my mother stopped talking because she had run out of control. Then came the familiar weapon. We're family. I looked out the apartment window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Funny, 24 hours earlier, I hadn't been family enough to sit in the front row. Now I was family enough to finance $40,000. I wasn't family yesterday. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then Patricia ended the call without another word. Exactly 43 minutes later, Olivia called. Unlike our mother, she skipped guilt entirely. She went straight to manipulation. Mom is overwhelmed. I'm sure she is. You know she gets emotional. So do I. Another pause. Ryan's parents are asking questions. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Not even embarrassment over what happened. The real emergency wasn't losing me. It was losing appearances. What kind of questions? Olivia hesitated. They wanted to know why they met every cousin, every aunt, every uncle. She stopped herself, but somehow never met my sister. Ryan had started asking. Exactly as I hoped. What did you tell him? That it was complicated. No. I interrupted calmly. You told him another lie. She exhaled sharply. Can we please focus on what's important? I am. The invoices aren't. She finally lost her patience. If you don't pay them, everyone will think we're scammers. I almost smiled. They'll think exactly what happened. She hung up. Less than 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, my father. Edward Donovan rarely called anyone. Growing up, he let Patricia speak for both of them. Even his birthday wishes usually arrived by text. Hearing his voice almost felt unfamiliar. Paige! He sounded tired. You've made your point. No. I've only started making it. Another long silence. I know yesterday wasn't ideal. Not ideal. I spent 12 hours dressed as hired staff at my own sister's wedding. He called it. Not ideal. I have a question. I spoke before he could continue. When Mom said you've always been a family of 3, I paused. Why didn't you correct her? Nothing. Not breathing. Not movement. Nothing. I didn't think. His voice cracked. It would go that far. It started going that far years ago. He had no answer. He quietly disconnected. Every single one of them reacted the same way. Confident while asking for money. Speechless when confronted with the truth. By afternoon, the situation became much worse. The vendors began replying. Each email was nearly identical. Your request has been processed. Outstanding balances will now be redirected to the event organizers while ownership of the contracts remains under review. Professional. Polite. Disastrous. Within minutes, the venue contacted Patricia. The florist contacted Olivia. The band contacted Edward. The illusion of a perfectly paid wedding collapsed one phone call at a time. That evening, something happened I hadn't anticipated. Ryan called. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I need you to tell me one thing." I waited. "Were you actually invited to the wedding?" There it was, the question my family had spent months avoiding. I answered with one sentence. "I was invited to pay for it." Silence. Not the awkward kind, the devastating kind. Then he asked something even more dangerous. "The catering uniform? Whose idea was that?" I closed my eyes. Until that moment, I had protected Olivia, protected my parents, protected every lie they built, but they had never protected me. It wasn't the venues. Another silence, longer this time. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice no longer sounded like a newly married husband. It sounded like a man realizing he had built his future on someone else's deception. "I think," he said quietly, "there are a lot of things about your family that nobody told me." He ended the call. No goodbye, no accusations, just silence. I set my phone on the kitchen counter. For the first time since the wedding, I wasn't waiting for the next humiliation. Someone else was, and somewhere across town, my family had just realized the most expensive part of that wedding was never going to be the invoices. It was the truth Ryan had only just begun to uncover. Ryan didn't call again. He didn't need to. The silence itself became dangerous. For someone like him, silence meant investigation. For someone like my mother, silence meant panic. By the following morning, Patricia had abandoned every strategy she'd relied on for years. Guilt hadn't worked. Manipulation hadn't worked. Even my father had failed to convince me to step back. So she did what she always did when she lost control. She started controlling everyone else. According to Aunt Evelyn, who had never been able to keep a secret longer than 10 minutes, Patricia spent the entire morning calling relatives before anyone else could. She wasn't apologizing. She was rewriting history. I was jealous. I had always been difficult. I wanted to ruin Olivia's wedding because I couldn't stand seeing my younger sister happy. Apparently, the catering uniform had been my own idea because I loved helping. Every version sounded different. Every version had one thing in common. None of them resembled the truth. Normally, those stories would have worked. Not this time. Because this time, there were too many witnesses asking the same question. Why would a successful 34-year-old woman volunteer to work 12 hours at her own sister's wedding? Nobody had a reasonable answer. By lunchtime, Patricia's phone was ringing faster than mine. Not vendors, guests, relatives, friends, people politely asking questions she could no longer avoid. Then the first crack became a fracture. Margaret Mitchell called. Not Ryan's father. Not Ryan. Margaret. Patricia answered expecting another thank you for the beautiful wedding. Instead, she received 20 minutes of questions. Questions only liars fear. Why hadn't anyone mentioned Paige before? Why wasn't she introduced during rehearsal? Why did Ryan discover he had a sister-in-law only after the reception? Why was the woman serving dinner wearing the same last name as the bride? Patricia tried every explanation. Distance, misunderstandings, busy careers, family tension. Margaret listened, then quietly ended the conversation with a sentence that traveled through both families before sunset. "I don't think we've been told the truth." That sentence did more damage than any accusation could have. Because once doubt enters a lie, people start looking for evidence themselves. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Ryan. Not a call, just one sentence. "Can we meet? There are things I need to hear from you, not from them." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened social media. Olivia had already deleted several wedding photos. Then more. Then almost the entire album. Comments had started appearing underneath the remaining pictures. Wasn't there another sister? Who was the woman serving your table? Why is everyone talking about catering? The comments disappeared one after another. Someone was deleting them almost as quickly as they appeared. That only made people ask more. Deleting questions never erases curiosity. it multiplies it. Meanwhile, another email arrived from Meadow Ridge Events. Payment remains pending. Awaiting authorization from contract holder. $41,000. Still untouched. Still waiting. Still hanging over everyone who had smiled while pretending I didn't exist. That evening, Edward appeared outside my apartment. He had never visited before. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of time. Because exhaustion had replaced certainty. He stood in the lobby holding nothing. No flowers. No gift. No prepared speech. Just regret arriving years too late. When I opened the building door, he didn't step inside. He simply looked at me. I wanted to apologize in person. I waited. I failed you. For words. More honest than anything my mother had said in decades. But honesty alone couldn't erase years of choices. You failed me long before the wedding. His shoulders dropped. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. I reminded him about birthdays he forgot because Olivia had dance competitions. The promotion he never celebrated because Olivia needed tuition. The Christmas, when I wired money instead of coming home because Mom said they couldn't afford both. Every memory carried the same pattern. Olivia received attention. I received responsibility. He never argued, because every example was true. When I finished, he quietly asked the question I'd been expecting. Is there anything we can do? For years, that question would have broken me. I would have offered another chance, another sacrifice, another compromise. Instead, I reached into the closet beside the front door, pulled out a neatly folded black shirt, the catering uniform. I'd washed it the night before, pressed every wrinkle out of it. I placed it gently into his hands. Edward frowned. I don't understand. You will. He looked down at the embroidered logo stitched across the chest, then back at me. What is this supposed to mean? It means... I met his eyes for the first time since the wedding. That's the last thing my family ever asked me to wear. He stared at the uniform for several long seconds. Then something inside him finally collapsed. Not his pride, his excuses. He walked away carrying the folded shirt like it weighed 100 pounds. I watched until he disappeared around the corner, closed the door, and for the first time, I realized the revenge was no longer something I was creating. It was something my family was now living through every single day. The worst part for them still hadn't happened. 3 days after my father left my apartment, carrying the catering uniform, Ryan asked to meet. Not at his house, not at a restaurant, not anywhere connected to the wedding. He chose a quiet coffee shop halfway between our cities. When I arrived, he was already there. No wedding ring. That was the first thing I noticed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the reception. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. He slid a folder across the table. I've been reading. Inside were copies of every vendor contract. Each page carried my signature. Not Olivia's, not Patricia's, mine. I called the venue, he said quietly. Then the florist. Then the caterer. He looked directly at me. They all told me the same thing. I stayed silent. You paid every deposit. Another silence. They also told me something else. He pushed one final page toward me. A copy of the seating chart. My name wasn't on it. Not crossed out. Not moved. It had never existed. Ryan exhaled slowly. They never planned for you to sit in that room. Hearing someone else say it out loud somehow hurt more than living through it. He leaned back in his chair. I asked Olivia why, and she said it was my mother's decision. I almost smiled. The blame had already started moving. But when I asked why she agreed, he stopped. She couldn't answer. For the first time since the wedding, someone else was asking the questions, and my family had no prepared script. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket. He placed something beside the contracts. A folded black fabric. The catering uniform. I found this in Olivia's closet. I looked at it without touching it. I asked why she kept it. His voice hardened. She laughed. That surprised me. Not because Olivia laughed. Because she had been arrogant enough to keep evidence of my humiliation. Ryan looked away for a moment before speaking again. I don't think I know the woman I married. Neither did I. Not anymore. He stood. I'm filing for an annulment. Not because of the money, not because of the contracts, because I married someone who watched her own sister be treated like hired staff. He shook his head and thought that was normal. He left the cafe without another word. I never saw him again. By sunset, Olivia knew. She called 18 times, then texted, then emailed, then started messaging through relatives. Every message sounded more desperate than the last. Not once did she apologize for the uniform. Not once did she apologize for erasing me. Every message revolved around Ryan. Please tell him the wedding wasn't my idea. He's overreacting. You're ruining my marriage. No. Her marriage had been built on a lie before it ever began. That night, Patricia arrived at my apartment unannounced. She wasn't elegant anymore. Her makeup had streaked down her face. Her hair was hastily tied back. For the first time in my life, she looked smaller than the fear she created. She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the hallway. You've made your point. I closed the door calmly. I don't think I have. You've destroyed this family. I almost laughed. No. I looked at her steadily. You destroyed it the moment you handed me that uniform. She ignored the sentence. Ryan had left. The vendors were threatening legal action. The Mitchell family refused every attempt to meet. Relatives had stopped answering her calls. Everything she had spent years protecting. Her reputation, her image, her perfect family, was collapsing all at once. Then came the sentence she'd never imagined saying. We need you. There it was. Not, we're sorry. Not, we were wrong. Only, we need you. I walked to the hallway closet, opened the door, removed a garment bag. Patricia's eyes filled with hope. She probably thought I had changed my mind. Instead, I unzipped it. Inside hung only one thing, the freshly pressed catering uniform. I placed it carefully into her hands. She stared at it in disbelief. What is this? The only place you ever saved for me. Her fingers tightened around the fabric. I don't want this. I know. I stepped closer. But you spent months making sure it fit me. Neither of us spoke. The silence became unbearable. Finally, I opened the front door. I think it's time you left. She didn't move. For a moment, she looked exactly like I had outside the wedding venue, standing at a doorway, realizing she wasn't welcome. Then, without another word, she walked out carrying the uniform. I watched the elevator doors close. For years, I thought revenge would feel like watching them suffer. I was wrong. Real revenge was watching them experience, for the first time, exactly what they had made me feel. And one final consequence was already on its way. The final consequence arrived 11 days after my mother walked out of my apartment carrying the catering uniform. It wasn't another phone call. It wasn't another invoice. It wasn't even another apology that wasn't really an apology. It was a certified envelope. Inside was a copy of Ryan and Olivia's annulment petition. The reason wasn't infidelity. It wasn't finances. It wasn't incompatibility. It was fraud through material concealment. Ryan's attorney argued that the marriage had been entered under a false representation of Olivia's family, supported by witness statements, vendor records, and evidence that I, her biological sister, had been intentionally concealed while financing the wedding itself. The contracts hadn't destroyed the marriage. The lies had. For several minutes, I simply stared at the document. Not because I felt victorious, because I finally understood something. The wedding hadn't been the beginning of my family's collapse. It had been the first moment the rest of the world saw the family I had lived with my entire life. The following weeks unraveled faster than anyone expected. The vendors refused additional payment plans. The venue demanded immediate settlement. The florist filed a collection claim. The catering company added penalties. The band threatened legal action. One by one, every bill Patricia thought would quietly disappear landed exactly where it belonged. Ryan's family refused to contribute a single dollar. Margaret Mitchell sent only one message to my parents. Trust, once broken, is expensive. She never contacted them again. Olivia moved out of the apartment she'd rented with Ryan before their honeymoon had even been unpacked. Most of the wedding gifts were returned. The expensive furniture they'd ordered for their new home was canceled. Within a month, the fairy tale wedding existed only in photographs no one wanted to post anymore. My parents weren't doing much better. To settle the mounting debt, they refinanced their house for the second time. My father sold the restored Mustang he'd spent nearly 10 years rebuilding. My mother quietly resigned from 2 charity committees after realizing every meeting had become filled with whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. No one confronted her. No one needed to. People simply knew. Reputations rarely collapse because of one mistake. They collapse when one undeniable truth forces everyone to reconsider years of smaller lies. As for me, life became remarkably quiet. I accepted the promotion I'd postponed because of the wedding planning. I finally booked the vacation I'd canceled twice to help Olivia with family emergencies. I started saying no without explaining why. It was strange at first. Then it became peaceful. About 3 months later, my father sent me a handwritten letter. Not asking for money. Not asking me to come home. Just 4 pages of honesty. He admitted that every time Patricia pushed me aside, he convinced himself it was temporary. Every time Olivia received more, he told himself I'd understand. Every silence became another habit. Eventually, he stopped noticing the difference between avoiding conflict and abandoning his daughter. For the first time in my life, he accepted responsibility without asking me to make him feel better. I answered 2 weeks later. My letter was much shorter. I forgive you. Forgiveness isn't the same as rebuilding trust. That part takes actions, not words. He never argued. He simply respected the boundary. My mother never wrote. According to Aunt Evelyn, Patricia still tells people I overreacted, that I chose money over family. Oddly enough, she never mentions the catering uniform anymore. Some memories become too dangerous to repeat. 6 months after the wedding, I opened the garment bag hanging in the back of my closet. The uniform was still there, perfectly folded, perfectly clean. I held it for several seconds before placing it inside a storage box. Not because I wanted to preserve the humiliation, because I never wanted to forget the lesson. For most of my life, I believed love was measured by sacrifice. The more I gave, the more I tolerated, the more invisible I became, the more deserving I would eventually be. I was wrong. Real love never requires you to disappear so someone else can shine. And family isn't defined by the people who share your last name. It's defined by the people who would never ask you to earn your place at their table. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd refused to wear that uniform. Maybe the wedding would have exploded before the ceremony. Maybe Ryan would have discovered everything sooner. Maybe my family would have found another way to blame me. None of that matters now. Because the most important decision I made that weekend wasn't putting on the uniform. It was deciding that it would be the last time I accepted the role they had written for me. The uniform was never the symbol of my humiliation. It became the symbol of the exact moment I stopped confusing obedience with love. The day my parents asked me to dress like hired staff, they believed they were proving exactly where I belonged. They were right about one thing. I didn't belong there. I just needed one unforgettable day to finally realize it.